What if a moment in your life simply started repeating itself, but each time with something wrong? Imagine waking up, living a completely normal day, and suddenly realizing you've been there before. The same words, the same gesture, the same setting, but this time there's a detail out of place. Too small to immediately catch your attention, but strange enough to cause a discomfort that's hard to ignore. Now tell me, have you ever experienced this? Perhaps not in such an obvious way, but that feeling of déjà vu, as if time had slightly malfunctioned, a small glitch in reality. It's happened to you before, hasn't it? That impression that something repeated itself, but not exactly the same, as if the universe had tried to recreate a moment, and missed by a little. Now imagine this happening again and again and again. At first it seems like a coincidence, then it seems like a figment of your imagination. But there comes a point when you start questioning everything. Is time broken? Are you trapped in a loop, or worse, is reality itself not as stable as it seems? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. There's a specific type of phenomenon that many people describe, but almost no one can fully explain. Moments that repeat themselves imperfectly. It's not a perfect loop, like in the movies. It's not that exact cycle that restarts from zero. It's something more disturbing, because it comes with errors, flaws, distortions, as if time were trying to correct itself, but only getting worse with each attempt. A glance that shifts direction for no reason. A phrase you're sure you've heard before, but with different words. An object that simply wasn't there before and now it is. These small details begin to accumulate, creating a feeling that something is profoundly wrong. And the strangest thing is that, most of the time, nobody but you notices. The people around them continue acting normally, as if nothing is happening, as if that moment were unique, when, in their minds, it has already happened many times, only never exactly the same way. This starts to mess with your perception, because if you can't even trust the sequence of events, what exactly can you trust? Your memory, your vision? Or could all of that also be affected by this kind of error? And this is where things start to get really interesting, and a little scary. Because when we talk about paradoxes, broken time and glitches in reality, we're not just talking about theory or fiction. We're talking about something that directly affects how you perceive the world, how you understand what is real. Now think about this. What if these repeated moments aren't accidents? What if they're signs of something bigger happening behind the scenes, something you can't fully see yet, but can already feel? Perhaps this is the point where everything starts to get out of control, because once you notice the pattern, there's no way to unsee it. And that's exactly where the story starts to get stranger than it should. And the more you start to notice these patterns, the harder it becomes to ignore them, because it's not just about what's happening, it's about how it makes you feel. That slight anxiety, like something is out of place all the time. Like you're one step behind reality, trying to keep up with something that already happened, but keeps happening again, in a different way. And perhaps the most unsettling thing is this, the feeling that you're not alone in this experience, even when it seems like you are. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has resonated with you the most so far. Has something similar ever happened to you? Even if it was just a strange feeling, a more intense déjà vu, or that moment when everything seemed almost the same, but it wasn't. Sharing this might seem small, but sometimes it's precisely there that we begin to notice patterns that would otherwise go unnoticed on our own. And I actually read these accounts, because, ultimately, this type of content doesn't just grow with ideas. It grows with real experiences. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who are also trying to understand this kind of feeling, this kind of mystery that seems small but affects everything. If you're enjoying this more psychological atmosphere, these themes of paradoxes, broken time, and reality glitches, it's definitely worth giving it a like now. This helps the video reach more people who also enjoy this type of narrative and encourages me to continue bringing even deeper and more engaging stories like this one. And if you want to continue exploring these mysteries with me, subscribe to the channel, because there's a lot we're still going to uncover together, and some of it might completely change the way you see reality. Now, going back to that feeling, because once you start noticing these flaws, they don't stop. At first, it seems like just a detail lost in the middle of the routine. But, little by little it begins to take on a different meaning, as if each imperfect repetition carried a hidden message, a kind of hidden truth that you haven't yet been able to fully decipher. And this is where your perception comes into play, because it's no longer just about what happens, it's about how you interpret it. Think about it. What if these mistakes aren't random? What if they're part of a larger transformation process? Something happening behind the scenes of reality that few can perceive. The feeling of broken time might not just be a flaw, it could be a sign, an adjustment, or even a consequence of decisions you don't even remember making. This changes everything, because when you start to see things this way, every little glitch stops being just strange and starts to have an impact. A look out of sync, a line of dialogue that doesn't fit, an event that seems repeated. All of this begins to build a silent, almost invisible but extremely powerful journey. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there comes a point where these repetitions cease to be merely perceptible and begin to directly interfere with your mindset. You start to doubt your choices, your memories, the logical sequence of events, as if reality were being rewritten while you are still living within it. And perhaps the most intriguing thing is this: you're not sure if you're trying to understand what's happening or if you're trying to adapt to something that has already changed. Comment below. This makes sense to me, and it is precisely at this point that the experience ceases to be theoretical and begins to happen for real. Imagine a character experiencing a simple, everyday moment. They enter a familiar place, perhaps a hallway, a room, or even their own house. Everything seems normal, until something inside them freezes for a second, a strange feeling, as if it had happened before, not just similar, but identical. He ignores it, keep going. But then, seconds later, the same scene happens again, the same step, the same sound, the same movement. Only this time a detail changes. An object that was previously on the left is now on the right. A light flashes differently. A phrase someone said comes with a word swapped. Too small to justify, too big to go unnoticed. Now this is starting to happen again. And with each repetition, his mind is conflicted, because logic says it doesn't make sense, but perception insists that it's happening. And the more he tries to rationalize, the further he gets from any clear explanation. The feeling isn't just one of confusion, it's of witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what really starts to take its toll isn't the environment, it's his mindset. The way he makes decisions changes. He hesitates before acting, as if trying to predict a mistake that hasn't even happened yet. Each choice begins to carry a different weight, as if any movement could intensify that strange pattern. And perhaps that's where everything starts to take on a new meaning, because it's not just about what's being repeated, but about how he reacts to it, about how this experience begins to shape his journey, creating doubts, silent revelations, and a transformation that happens without warning. Write this down, I'm starting to realize, and that's when the discomfort stops being subtle and starts to dominate everything around it. Because the repetitions are no longer spaced out. They come closer together, shorten, almost overlap. The character barely finishes an action and already feels like they're about to relive it. Only now, the mistakes aren't small, they start to become evident, almost aggressive. A movement that freezes midway, as if someone had paused reality. A sound that distorts, echoes, repeats in layers. A face that takes a second longer to react, as if it were loading up. And this starts to have a real psychological impact. Because when the environment ceases to be trustworthy, the mind tries to take control. It begins to observe everything more closely, trying to anticipate patterns, to identify flaws before they happen. But the more it tries to understand, the more the situation fragments, as if the very attempt to control intensifies the problem. Now time truly seems broken. The people around are still there, but they no longer seem fully present. Some actions are repeated with slight variations, others simply make no sense. A dialogue begins, restarts, changes midway, as if several versions of the same scene were competing for space at the same time. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because at this stage, it's not just the environment that's unstable anymore. It's his perception that begins to transform. The line between what is real and what is a mistake begins to disappear, and this completely changes the way he makes decisions, how he reacts, how he interprets every detail around him. Perhaps the most unsettling thing is realizing that there is no longer an original moment. Everything seems like a copy of something that has already been altered several times, as if he were trapped in the background of a reality that is constantly being rewritten, without warning, without apparent logic, only with small flaws that reveal that something much bigger is happening behind the scenes. And when that awareness begins to form, there's no going back. Comment below. This is getting weird. And when everything starts to lose its logic, the mind tries to create one, because human beings cannot endure chaos for long without seeking a pattern, and that is exactly what they begin to do. Even amidst these failures, these distorted repetitions, an almost automatic need arises to find an explanation, a structure, a hidden truth that gives meaning to what is happening. At first he thinks it might be something psychological, a perceptual error, an effect of the mind itself trying to organize too much information at once. But this hypothesis begins to fail when the details become too specific, too consistent to be just imagination. There is a pattern in the errors. There is a logic behind what seems random, and that completely changes the impact of the experience. Because if there's a pattern, then there's an origin. Now, new possibilities are beginning to emerge. Perhaps he's trapped in a kind of imperfect time loop where each repetition undergoes slight alterations, as if time were being reprocessed, or perhaps they are overlapping realities, different layers existing simultaneously, leaking onto one another, creating these glitches that he perceives. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's an even more unsettling line of thought. What if none of this is a mistake? What if this broken time is, in fact, the true state of things, and what he experienced before was just a simplified version of reality? This completely changes the mindset, because it transforms chaos into revelation. Each repetition is seen as part of a process. Each failure, a fragment of something bigger happening behind the scenes. as if he were gradually undergoing a kind of silent transformation, where his perception is being adjusted to see beyond what has always been considered normal. And the more he accepts this possibility, the more the patterns seem to intensify. Write this down. There's something behind this, and it is precisely when he begins to accept this possibility that the paradox appears, because, in an almost instinctive impulse, he decides to act, to test, to change something small within the repetition. A different gesture, a word outside the norm, a decision he's sure he's never made before. The intention is simple: to break the cycle, to get out of this distorted flow, to regain control. But the effect is the opposite. Reality doesn't correct, it reacts. The moment repeats itself, only now more unstable. The environment is slow to respond, the sounds arrive late. People seem to recalculate their actions, as if that change had caused a direct impact behind the scenes of everything. And then he tries again. Another choice, another attempt to adjust what is wrong, and everything gets worse. Each new decision creates an even more fragmented version of that same moment. As if time no longer knows which path to follow, repetitions cease to be mere variations, and begin to accumulate, overlapping possibilities that shouldn't coexist. This generates a suffocating feeling because now there is no longer a clear timeline of events. There are several, happening simultaneously. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because that's where the paradox is fully revealed. The more he tries to correct it, the more he distorts it. The more he searches for a way out, the more trapped he becomes. This completely transforms his mindset, because every decision takes on an unpredictable weight. There are no more neutral choices, and perhaps the hidden truth behind this is even more unsettling. Perhaps the mistake isn't in the moment being repeated, but in the very attempt to change it. As if the system were reacting to its own awareness, adjusting reality in response to interference. If that's the case, then every attempt to escape might be exactly what keeps everything going. Comment below. The more you mess with it, the worse it gets, and it is at this point that everything stops seeming merely unstable and begins to break down, because the repetitions no longer follow any recognizable sequence. They collapse on top of each other, as if several versions of the same instant were being displayed simultaneously. The character looks around and sees duplicated movements, delayed, advanced. A gesture begins, but never ends in the same way. A speech emerges, but fragments into multiple voices, like misaligned echoes. Reality is no longer failing subtly. It's breaking down openly. The walls seem to vibrate, as if they weren't solid enough to support what's happening. The environment is bent in small details, shadows that don't follow the bodies, objects that appear and disappear between blinks. Everything takes on a strange texture, as if it were being rendered in real time, and with errors. Now the impact isn't just psychological, it's sensory. He tries to focus, tries to cling to something fixed, something reliable, but there is no longer a stable point. Each attempt to find logic only reveals more disconnected fragments, more hidden flaws in the background. And the more he observes, the more he realizes that he is not seeing just one broken reality. He is seeing several, colliding. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because at that moment, something even more disturbing emerges. He begins to see versions of himself, slight delays in his own movements, as if another version of him were slightly out of sync. Decisions he hasn't yet made are already happening on another level. This completely transforms his journey, because now he's not just reacting to the environment, he's confronting multiple possibilities of himself. And perhaps this is the greatest revelation yet. It's not just the world that's collapsing, it's its very identity that's beginning to fragment along with it. Comment below. Reality shattered, and it is precisely when everything seems to have reached its limit that something changes. In the midst of this collapse, these overlapping versions and fragmented decisions, a different perception emerges. It's no longer about trying to understand what's happening outside, but about realizing what has always been there, hidden in the background. A silent, almost intuitive feeling that perhaps he never truly left the initial moment. Everything that came after may not be a sequel, it could be a variation. This completely changes the perspective, because if each repetition is not a continuation, but rather an attempt, then perhaps none of them is the original. Perhaps what he calls reality is merely an unstable construct, being adjusted with each new interference, each new decision. And the more he tries to find a starting point, the more he realizes that this point simply no longer exists. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this revelation carries a much greater impact than it seems. It doesn't just break the logic of time, it redefines his very identity. What if, in the midst of these repetitions, he too has been altered? What if the version trying to understand all this is no longer the same one that lived through the beginning? This possibility completely changes the mindset. Each choice now ceases to be merely a reaction, and becomes part of a continuous transformation, as if it were being recreated at every instant, shaped by the failures, the attempts, the small distortions that arise in this cycle. And perhaps the hidden truth is this: there is no error happening, there is a process that wasn't designed to be easily understood. And when this idea starts to make sense, the discomfort gives way to something even stranger, an unsettling acceptance. Comment below. Nothing is original. And when that acceptance begins to emerge, everything changes in an even more subtle way. Because now it's no longer the environment that draws attention, nor the obvious glitches of reality. The focus shifts inward, to how he interprets all of this. And that's where the psychological impact becomes deeper than any external distortion. He begins to observe himself in a different way, almost as if he were analyzing his own consciousness from the outside. The repetitions, once frightening, now seem to have an emotional pattern. Certain moments always arise after specific internal decisions, as if it weren't time itself that was broken, but the way it reacts to time. This creates a new layer of understanding, where reality ceases to be merely something external and becomes a direct reflection of mindset. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this perception opens up space for a more delicate hidden truth. Perhaps the glitches aren't in the world, but in the way it connects with the world. Each repetition may be less about the environment and more about the impact of choices, about how small decisions create invisible ramifications that manifest as distortions. This completely transforms his journey. What once seemed like a collapse of reality now begins to look like a mirror, a broken mirror. Yes, but still a reflection. And this reflection shows not only what is happening around him, but also what is happening inside him. With each repetition, he realizes that he is not only living the same moment in different ways, he is being forced to confront different versions of himself. Some more hesitant, others more impulsive, others simply lost within their own understanding of what is real. And perhaps the greatest impact of all this is not the disruption of time, but the shattering of the illusion of control. Comment below. Everything is a reflection, and when that realization finally settles in, nothing is ever simple again, because now he can no longer look at any moment as something isolated. Each instant carries a silent suspicion, a feeling that there is something behind it, adjusting details that no one else notices. Reality no longer seems like a continuous flow. It seems like a system under constant observation, as if it were being recalculated with every decision, every thought, every microchoice, and that creates a different kind of tension. It's no longer the fear of obvious mistakes. It's the discomfort of the almost imperceptible, a slight delay in a reaction, a minimal change in someone's tone of voice, a scenario that seems the same, but doesn't convey the same feeling as before. Everything begins to gain this invisible weight, as if stability were just a well-constructed illusion. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because at this stage, the mind itself begins to adapt to this new state of perception. It no longer tries to escape repetitions, it tries to predict variations. And, without realizing it, this places it within a new, even more complex cycle, where each attempt at understanding generates new layers of interpretation, as if its consciousness were being expanded, but also tested. And perhaps the most unsettling part is precisely this. The system doesn't seem broken, it seems alive, reacting, adjusting, responding. And when he starts to accept this as a possibility, one last repetition occurs, the same moment, the same setting, everything identical, until the instant when an almost invisible detail changes again, as if it were a sign, too small to be noticed by anyone else, but impossible to ignore for those who have seen the pattern before. And this time he no longer knows if he's in reality, or if he's already past it. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Comment below. I'm still here, and if you've made it this far, this kind of story probably hasn't gone unnoticed by you. Perhaps it was just curiosity at first. But at some point this idea of repeated moments, broken reality, and small glitches in time began to make more sense than it should. And if this resonated with you in any way, it's worth subscribing to the channel, because this is exactly the type of narrative we explore here. Stories that lie on the thin line between the psychological, the symbolic, and what seems impossible to explain. If you felt a connection to the topic, please like the video. This greatly helps to bring more content of this style and ensures that this journey continues to reach more people who also enjoy delving into these mysteries. And leave a simple comment below, just to show you were here until the end. I'm with you until the end. Sometimes, it's in these small signs that we realize who truly stayed with us throughout the entire experience, right up to the very last moment. And if you want to continue along this same line of thought, with other stories that further expand on this feeling of unstable reality and distorted perceptions, there's a video right here waiting for you. Just click and follow along with me there.